3, 2, 1, and scene. Welcome back to the second episode in the theory of training. So last week you would have seen we did managing of resources, and someone had a great idea in the comments was to break these down further into the usual kind of categories we put our listeners into. So we have our weightlifters, powerlifters, crossfitters, and then we have our real athletes. So everyone knows by now the real athletes is not a dig at anyone else, as see. It's just simply, that's how we categorize our athletics, MMA, you know, our fucking field sports, rugby, soccer, football, all that kind of crack. That's how we just categorize those, because they are a different kind of section to the other three athletes, so primarily gym focused athletes. So today's episode is focusing exclusively on CrossFit. Now I sure hope you can see the board. If not,
you can't.
So today's just on CrossFitters, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about, so we want to start with CrossFit because it's probably the most complex of the kind of four groups that we've named there to manage, okay? So
it's definitely the easiest from the outside looking in. It's very easy to see the different discrete sports, or the discrete skills within it.
So last week you would have seen, we talked about, so if you haven't watched last week's video, it's probably best that you just go back and watch it. Sarah, we talked about simply how each kind of unit of work is represented by a block, so like a child's block is what we used, and then we had a pool of resources, and we had a limited pool of resources available to you as an athlete, and these aren't infinite resources, and they take certain periods of time to come back, and the more work you do, the slower these resources will come back. As training time goes on, and as you develop as an entire organism, your resources available to you hopefully have increased if you're smart with your training. Now, however, these resources are very fickle, and they rely an awful lot on like your nutrition, your sleep, your training selection, your genetics, your psychology, stress levels, everything interplays in these available resources for you, and the key component of those resources is that they are limited, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about CrossFit. So we have kind of three big sections in CrossFit that are very important for you to learn, okay? So we have skills. These would be things like your muscle ups, these would be things like your snatches, your clean and jerks. Not so much basic skills like deadlifts and stuff, so they're very minimal. Learning curve those very low, but we're talking about kind of complex skills. Now, obviously, skills encompass everything you do in the gym, but skills would be fine motor patterns, so things that need good technique to be executed correctly, not only from a performance point of view, but from an injury prevention point of view. Then we have skills like strength, so that's very obvious. That's your absolute strength in different aspects. And then we have endurance. Yep. So Fitz is going to kick off with some of the complex interplays of skills and some of the requirements.
Yeah, so I suppose the thing with skills is, whereas the other two are fairly, it's really clear, you know, with endurance we need a lot of volume, with strength there's a lot of load coming through us. The skills will take from our pool of resources in a way that you're probably not going to be able to easily track, in terms of, like, you might be able to track it with heart rate variability or something, but you're not going to really see this kind of fatigue when you're looking at kind of like how good you feel in the morning or how good you feel after you warm up. So if we look at learning a skill, there's probably, or kind of having a skill, especially in CrossFit, there's probably three different kind of sections to each of those. So the first one will be learning the new skill in the first place. So if I take bar muscle up as my skill, learning that skill will require me to use a huge amount of the total training resources. After that, then I have an amount that's going to be used to kind of refine the skill. So if I, like, it might take you 2 or 3 months to get your first muscle up, you can then spend the next 15 years trying to get better at muscle ups or string muscle ups together, or be able to kip into them easier. The last thing then is retaining a skill. So skills aren't just something like, you can't just get a muscle up once and then never do it again. You probably won't be able to do a muscle up if you haven't done one in a year or 2 years or 6 months, or then in certain cases, if you haven't done it in 2 weeks, you mightn't be able to do it again. So they're the three different kind of phases. If we look at the first one of learning a new skill is really, really expensive in terms of your kind of resources or your pool of resources, because what you have to do is you have to put in enough time to whereby you've like gained a motor pattern, and then really, really instill that motor pattern into your head. So if that's something like a handstand push-up or a handstand walk, you're starting with stuff like handstand holds against the wall, handstand like kick-ups. Then you might be doing things like shoulder taps as you're on the wall. So these are long elongated processes that like you have to achieve each step before you can go forward. So that stage of learning a new skill is actually very, very expensive. And for 99% of the athletes who are doing CrossFit, there's always a new skill to be learned. Even the pro athletes, they'll have like a new sled, or they'll have a new skill at the games, or you'll see like a year and a half ago when those burpees over a dumbbell became a big thing because they were in a few of the open workouts. So there's constantly this thing, like you'll nearly always have a new skill that you're learning, or like something you're tinkering around with. The next one then is the kind of refining, or the improving the skill. So like Gerf learned to weightlift when he was 16 or 17, and he's still refining his snatch. You know, it's like constantly working on something to make it better. That might be you having to go to a special class once or twice a week to try and get better at something. That might be you having to video a lift or video a skill and then review that video and try and break it down yourself. That might be you having to train with a group of people who are able to achieve those skills. Like, so that's expensive in its own right, of the training resources. And then the last one is the least expensive. So just retaining a skill, you might have to do a skill once a week or twice a week just to keep it sharp. So if you're snatching 100 kilos and you want to stay snatching 100 kilos, you'll probably have to snatch twice a week realistically to keep that skill there. So of the three of them, the retaining it is obviously the least expensive in terms of kind of resources and how much you have to draw from it. And I think learning it at the very start is definitely the most expensive.
So moving on to our second kind of big section is our strength. Okay, so some of the issues that come into play when we're trying to improve our absolute strength is strength takes a very, very long time to acquire. Okay, so the issue with strength is that you have to put in the correct amount of hours, so enough hours. So too many hours and we won't get benefits, we'll get too fatigued. If we take kind of too little, we won't get strong enough. So the thing with strength is we need to be very precise with our plans in strength. Okay, so a lot of time our average gym goer in CrossFit spends too sporadic a time in certain areas of strength. Okay, so a lot of times they'll come to the gym, they'll have done no back squats for maybe 4 months, and then they'll start doing something like small off junior, and a lot of you listening to this have done this, and then you'll be like, geez, my back feels up, my knees were very sore. So you cannot approach strength like that. Okay, so we want to be very, very frugal with our resources when we're allocating them to strength, because you've so much other work to do. However, strength is arguably the basis of improving your other two aspects, so we'll get to that a little bit later. But for strength training, most important thing to remember is it takes a long time to get strong. It literally takes years to get strong. Okay, so if we look at elite powerlifters, a lot of times, so more and more we see people in their 30s and 40s setting world records. Now I know world records are kind of a loose term in terms of powerlifting worlds, but it's still that strength is not a new phenomenon. It's certainly an aspect of human physiology. That absolute strength, so applying high force to heavy objects, does improve over time, but it takes a long time to improve it. Now, if you need to be very, very patient with this. Okay, so you can't do too much at once. So that's a very important aspect. You can't rush strength. One of the positives of strength, however, and we'll touch on this again a little bit later, is that strength takes a very long time to leave you. So if you have acquired a certain base of strength, this will stay with you for a very long time, and ultimately you will never lose all of your strength. So this kind of comes down to some of the kind of finer motor pattern skills that you've learned. So these kind of particular neural pathways that you've ingrained, this isn't actually in itself a skill. So that kind of strength is essentially a skill for your body that it's learned. Okay, so, and its ability to retain the skill is quite high. Now obviously depending on your genetics, how long you've training, what age you started training, it will obviously be vastly different across people, but lots of people can stay strong with minimal effort. Okay, and you can improve your strength with if you're intelligent, you can improve it very, very steadily while not kind of fatiguing yourself overly. Okay, so if we look at kind of the fatigue, and we touched on this a little bit last week on the managing your resources, we've kind of 3 distinct areas of fatigue for our gym goer. So we have like local muscular fatigue. So that would be, you come into the gym, you do 3x10, you've got
too many bicep curls.
So you've got a huge pump in your quads. And then your performance immediately after this, when you have just like literally in the same gym session, so once you've done your 3x10 back squat or your 3x20 or whatever you've done, that local muscular fatigue will inhibit your performance, but it will dissipate relatively soon. So you don't keep that pump for the next 6 hours. Okay, So then after that we move on to our CNS fatigue, or central nervous fatigue. That takes a little bit longer to recover from. Now ultimately we can get to a stage where we've totally ruined this, and other lifts, depending on like the absolute weight or what kind of session we've done, or other fatigue will influence this. But ultimately CNS fatigue will recover next. And then finally we have tissue damage. So this is the actual damage to our tissues that is from the strength training, so actual muscle fiber damage. Okay, so now you've heard about this a lot. We've all heard that you make your gains outside the gym, and that is not in itself wrong. Okay, so you need to cause some damage to force the system to adapt to these new gains. Okay, so to force it to overcome what it thinks is its new homeostasis, its new environment, so it thinks it needs to be stronger. You want to trick your body essentially into trying to get stronger. So that's ultimately what strength training is you do want to get to a point of overreaching, but then we want to be really smart with how we let that fatigue dissipate, and then we return to the gym again and try new strength training. Okay, so moving on.
Yeah, so then the next thing, and like the last of the three we'll talk about, is your like endurance training or your cardio training or whatever you might want to call it. So it's kind of higher end work capacity stuff. The thing people kind of get confused around is the intersection of the strength work and the cardiovascular work. So the kind of CrossFit WODs, or like the kind of classic short high intensity stuff, that's still endurance training, and you get some strength aspects in it, you get skill aspects in it, but what we're talking about here is like endurance. So it's cardiovascular endurance over a relatively prolonged period. So there's two things here to really draw from our resources. So the first one is the energy expenditure in this section is going to be so much higher. Just the calories out is going to be so much higher than all the other sections. So if I'm doing kind of 2 or 3 WODs in my hour or hour and a half of training, the calories burned is going to be so much higher than any amount of squats, pulls or deadlifts, or any amount of kipping ring muscle ups or handstand walks, or any of our kind of discrete gymnastic skills. So that's the first challenge, is that we burn a huge amount of calories there, and like as Gareth would have spoken about, those training resources are very much focused around recovery, and then recovery is very much focused around calories. So we're burning a lot of calories, using a lot of energy there, and then that takes from our resources. The next one then is the overall volume. So this is something we've chatted about a good bit in the last few weeks, but for aerobic conditioning, a lot of it is just getting the work done over a prolonged period. So no matter how high the intensity is, or like how much intensity you bring to a session, you still need to be training for a prolonged period. So I can go ham on the rower and do 5 1,000 meter repeats with 60 seconds rest in between, but I still won't get the training effect in terms of aerobic endurance that I would get from doing 4 sets of 15 minutes with a set stroke rate and just nice repeated action all the time. So a lot of our aerobic stuff, we need the prolonged periods, and if training resources now revolves around the amount of time we can spend training, like most of us aren't professional athletes, you don't just get to go to the gym and sit in a rower for 2 hours, or go for a 10k run and then be able to do a gym session as well. So the actual time you have to spend there is very expensive in terms of resources.
So now we come to the actual practicalities of these subheadings. Okay, so how do we implement this kind of theories, and how do we take into account the effects of these and all the different kind of dynamics into play? Okay, so what we need to do first is prioritize. Okay, so we need to prioritize your weaknesses, and there's a good case for this, is prioritizing your strengths first. Okay, so assuming you're somewhat of a competitive athlete, so a lot of CrossFitters are semi-competitive, so they might not be games athletes, you might not be whatever regional sanctionals athletes, but you might be competing at local competitions like regionals, very small ones, it might be inter-gym ones, or maybe you just want to get better at CrossFit. Okay, so you need to pick one of the 3 headings that potentially you are either very good at or very bad at, and then prioritize this. Okay, so you may plan this out yearly, so you may go, I want to focus on my running first, because that is typically much lower, it's lagging behind a lot more than my strength or my skills. So you pick your running, you feel like your strength is pretty decent, so you figure out a way of maintaining your strength. You figure out what skills can be maintained while you're doing endurance, while they won't affect your endurance or your strength training. So you pick your endurance, you prioritize this. Very important is you acknowledge that you're going to lose some performance in the other two areas. So you're going to acknowledge that your back squat's going to go down a little bit. You're going to acknowledge that your snatch is going to reduce in your max a little bit. It may feel heavier, and you're going to be totally okay with this. And you're going to keep your endurance training. So you're going to say 6 weeks, I'm going to focus on my running or my rowing, and I'm going to say this is my goal for now. I'm totally okay with losing gains on the others, because it's important to remember, like I said, strength takes a long time to lose. However, skills, once learned and once you refine them, whether you lose some quickly, they're closely tied with strength, okay? So if you have a relatively good strength basis, these will help you maintain skills, okay? So you pick your endurance, you sit for the 6 weeks, you focus on that, then you move on to your next 6 weeks or your 8 weeks, however long you feel is needed. So you've got the rotating your back squat program, you've gone 8 weeks, I'm going to improve my back squat because my legs are pretty weak. And then because strength interplays with endurance, so all of our 3 headings are closely tied together, okay? So you know that running is essentially a series of jumps, basically what it is, and the stronger your legs are, the more it'll help your endurance within reason, okay? So you know that your endurance time is going to get a little bit worse for you a few weeks, but you know it comes back quickly. So you focus on your strengths, you bring up your strength to a certain level, so you bring it up to Fitz's nipples, but your endurance is down here, so you bring your endurance up, and we're just slowly bringing each one of our 3 headings up, okay? So rising tide lifts all boats. So don't forget that when you're not focusing on the other 2 or whatever one you're focusing on, it will slowly help lifting everything. And if you're very smart, as you bring up everything, you will eventually become the best athlete possibly.
Yeah, I think it's important to note before we go on to the second piece, it's important to note on that look, like, this is the way that we found the most success by far in the last 6-7 years of coaching CrossFit athletes. Like, this is, so other people have a system whereby they never prioritize anything, and it would be along the lines of like a concurrent periodization model where there is no periodization and they just keep bringing everything up very, very slowly. If you're not a full-time athlete, and if you're somebody who kind of can only have 3, 4, 5 sessions a week in the gym, these kind of prioritization strategies are vital. Like, or you might be really genetically gifted and you can just keep everything going because one of these, like, you could be bullshit strong, and just because of that you can just bring everything up at the same time because you don't even have to prioritize strength, you don't even have to think about it. That is one thing to know. This is definitely the system we found has worked best. So you've gone through Garth's first step, which is prioritizing. The second step then is figuring out how to retain and just keep everything at like a solid level as you push one thing. So if we take the squat program as an example, if Garth is now a CrossFit athlete and he's going to do the 8 weeks of back squatting to really push everything, what I'm going to have to look at there is, what will that squatting system do to my skills, and what will that squatting system or training program do to my endurance? So obviously so if I'm doing long running based events the day before or the day after the squat, I'm going to have to change that around. So I'll probably drop the intensity, I'll probably drop the volume as well on those, and then I'll just need to figure out, okay, rowing intervals keep me very fit and they don't beat me up too badly, or I might have to figure out going on the air bike really beats my legs up and I won't be able to squat the next day. So it is a thing of trial and error, see what works, see what doesn't work, but you're basically just shoveling water back into the bucket, making sure not too much water comes out, and keeping yourself level on those. The main thing you're doing with your skills and your endurance is not hurting your strength work, and that you're not pushing for anything too mental.
So finally then we have our regularly assess where we are. So this is something you always want to be doing, okay? So this is looking at where you are in your training, what's happening, how is your performance going. So you want to figure out ways of measuring performance, so key indicators. You want to measure your recovery, how you're feeling on day to day. Now for a while HRV, or heart rate availability, was kind of it took a little kind of leap in the fitness culture, and why there's a lot of issues with that, and we'll get that to one of these theory of training videos. But for now, you want to look at different areas. You want to look at performance indicators, figure out what these are for you. So if it's your back squat, maybe it doesn't have to be your back squat, it could be front rack lunges, and you might know that you feel the best in other areas. For some reason your legs feel better when you do heavy front rack lunges. It can be whatever it is. For your endurance events, it can be your mile run, or your 100 meter or your 1000 meter row. It can be your benchmark WODs, so ones you do So if you're a competitive CrossFit athlete, you pick a couple of broad benchmark WODs, so ones that cover a lot of areas that are kind of OG CrossFit as it is, and then you regularly repeat these in a test week, a very smart test week, so you know that you've controlled as many variables as you possibly can in this test week. So then, let's say you've done 6 weeks of endurance, you've done 6 weeks of strength, you've done your kind of 4 to 5 weeks of skill practice, and then you kind of have a week where you do 2 to 3 weeks of CrossFit, say. So this isn't like specific, but this is kind of an example of what you could do. And then you get your test week, you have your benchmark WODs or your lifts or whatever it is you need to do. So probably for strength, you'll probably have peaked your strength at the end of the strength cycle, but you'll get your test week, you'll have your 3 to 5 WODs, you'll do them on the same day if possible, you'll eat the same food, you'll go to bed at the same time, and then you'll run through this all again. So this stuff is very repeatable. You do your next set of endurance, next set of strength, next set of skills, you repeat your benchmark WODs, and you need to be really honest with yourself. And if your results, your times didn't come down, your times didn't go up, or your weights didn't go up, you need to look back at what you did, and I hope you're recording everything you're doing, or you're working with a coach potentially, and you go, geez, my back squat got better, but my WODs didn't get better, or whatever. So maybe that's a key to you, that my back squat doesn't need to improve anymore. Maybe I need to improve my skills, my efficiency with thrusters. Maybe I need to get better at my gymnastics, stuff like that.
And if you want to look more into auditing, one of the Seek Strength podcasts, I think it might be around 20 something episode number, how to audit your training. There's an hour on that. I think the last point I want to make on this is like, we talk about finding things that work for you, and we talk about being like critical and auditing your training and doing all this. You also have to be a bit smart, right? If I'm really working hard to get one of my skills up, and I'm tearing my hands doing deadlifts, you need to be intelligent about that. Your hands, your shoulders, and your knees are pretty much the 3 things, some people's backs, that will give up on you before anything else. And don't be like pig-headed and full of grit and just keep going thinking this is great. Like, those things will stop you before any amount of central nervous system fatigue.
Yep.
If you tear your hand or you get a flare-up of tendonitis in your knees, it doesn't matter how intelligent your training program is, or how pumped you are, or how many David Goggins videos you watched. Like, these are the things, this is the meat vehicle that you move around the world in. So that is something you really do need to watch. If you always tear your hands doing something, get a set of grips, or else harden up your hands, or else don't do that thing.
Thanks for watching, guys. Next episode will be, what do you want to be on? We do real athletes?
We'll probably do real athletes, yeah.
Right, we'll do real athletes next week. Thanks for watching, guys. So if you are a CrossFitter, so we have to plug a little bit because we do offer some services. So if you go to seekstrength.com, we have strength for fitness athletes. Now we couldn't call it strength for CrossFit, obviously, for obvious reasons, because the old CrossFit lawyers are aggressive. But if you need strength training, so if you need like snatch, clean and jerk, absolute strength squats, deadlifts, midline work, overhead pressing, all that stuff is covered. So any strength, any kind of complexes you might need in competition are covered in the Strength for Fitness Athletes program. It's 4 days a week, €30 per month. You can submit videos for technical feedback, and we're always available. Just ask any stupid question you have, and trust me, there is no question too stupid, because we've seen
everything.
There's no such thing as rock bottom. So thanks for watching, guys, and leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that jazz.
Yeah, comments are great.
Yeah, comments are great. We like interacting.
Comments just entertain us as much as anything else. Obviously it's great to get your feedback, but comments are entertaining.
And we love actually when people say, oh, that video was great, it really helped us, because this took probably 10 hours total to prepare for. 8 hours, say. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.